That was San Juan Mayor Carmen Yulín Cruz. I interviewed her last month in San Juan's Roberto Clemente Coliseum, where she and her entire mayoral staff were living after Hurricane Maria devastated Puerto Rico. It made landfall on September 20th. I began by asking the mayor how Hurricane Maria has changed Puerto Rico.
I think September 20th changed the Puerto Rican reality forever. We live in a different San Juan and a different Puerto Rico, not because of what we're lacking. The majority of the island is still without any power. Only about 40 to 60% of the population has water. That doesn't mean that it's good water. We still have to boil it or put chlorine in it to be able to drink it. Medical services are really, really bad because of the lack of electricity. The supplies in the supermarkets are not there yet, so people are having a lot of trouble getting the supplies that they need. But still, the fierce determination of people has not dwindled. And to me, that's been a very, I would say, a big lesson to learn.
Can you talk about this public power company, the largest in the United States? Do you think there's an effort in this time, in the aftermath of the hurricane, of an effort to just privatize it for it totally to fail? And what do you think has to be done about that?
It cannot be privatized. I am, and a lot of people, totally against, because we are 100 miles long by 35 miles wide. That's a monopoly. It doesn't matter how you want to disguise it. It's a monopoly. And what we're doing is we're putting in private hands the decision as to where our economic development is spread, where the sense of equality or inequality will happen. So power isn't just about the power grid. It's also about the ability that the Puerto Rican people may have in the years to come to ensure that there is appropriate economic development and equally divided amongst all the 78 municipalities in Puerto Rico.
Disaster capitalism, what does that term mean to you? And do you think that's happening here, using a crisis to accomplish something that couldn't be accomplished otherwise?
You know, I wish I had never been introduced to that term. Also the shock treatment, right? Using the chaos to strip employees of their bargaining rights that took 40, 50 years for the unions to be able to determine. That is something very important. And it just means taking advantage of people when they are in a life or death situation. It is the most, an absolute mistreatment of human rights. It means that the strongest really feed off the weakest until everything that's left is the carcass. And what we cannot understand is why. Because that is so against the American spirit that we see. We have had in San Juan more than 500 volunteers in a span of 4 weeks, coming here, leaving their homes, taking their vacation, nurses, Teamsters, AFL-CIO, UFCW, LEUNA workers, just leaving their homes. I met a person from California that sold their Harley Davidson. Sold their Harley Davidson to come to San Juan and help for 2 weeks. You have, you know, the United States has a big heart. You know what it is to help those in need. And then the central government, the federal government in the United States seems to be just playing a totally different tune. This slowness, this total pace of just getting relief to people, life and death relief to people, it's unthinkable.
You mentioned death. As we flew in here, we heard about bodies being incinerated at morgues that are not counted. Do you actually know the death toll right now, and is that happening?
No, we don't know. It has been reported that 911 deaths have been, or bodies have been cremated since Maria. Why is that happening? 911. Why is that happening? We have no idea. You know, usually when you cremate people at that rate, it's because you're trying to ensure that an outbreak of whatever disease doesn't come out. But whatever it is, we should know about it. And again, I don't understand why these things are not being openly talked about.
Let's go back to when President Trump attacked you. I think it shocked many people because by then people had heard of you. You were a familiar image across our TV screens as you were, waist chest high in water with your bullhorn, helping to save people and evacuate people. So that's the mayor of San Juan that we became familiar with. And then you have the President of the United States attacking you. What was the quote? First, you had the acting head of the Department of Homeland Security talking about
saying that this was a good news story. No, that really, I don't know if I can say the word on TV, but it really upset me because this has never been a good news story. When devastation hits and people are dying because they don't have dialysis, appropriate medical care, or food and water, whose mind and whose heart would call this a good news story? So I hadn't actually heard her say that. And I've actually met her twice after that, and we've had good meetings. Good things have come from those meetings. But to me, at that moment, it was like a total lack of connection with reality. Maybe in Trumpville or at Mar-a-Lago.
So President Trump says the mayor of San Juan, who was very complimentary of only a few days ago, has now been told by the Democrats you must be nasty to Trump. He tweeted this from his Bedminster Golf Resort in New Jersey, and went on to say such poor leadership ability by the mayor of San Juan and others in Puerto Rico who are not able to get their workers to help. They want everything to be done for them when it should be a community effort.
You know what I thought? Poor guy. Poor guy. You know, it must be very difficult to live in a world where reality is very different to what you want it to be. And it's very easy to try to change the dialogue when you're failing. It's less like when he get himself a 10. Well, if it's a 10 out of 100, I agree, because it's still a failing grade.
Can you tell us what your meeting with him was like when President Trump came here? What we saw is the president hurling rolls of paper towels at hurricane survivors.
Yeah, what I heard was a president disconnected with reality and not representing the real values of the American people. A man that said, this is not a real catastrophe. Now, Katrina, that was a real catastrophe. He has then rescinded what he says. You know, he says one thing one day, he says another thing another day. It's very hard to keep up with the man, and who wants to, anyway. But he tried to avoid me. You know, I'm small, so it's easy for him.
Where were you?
I was sitting in a corner.
Where?
Oh, this was at the Muñoz Marin Air Force Base. And, you know, I went because you have to respect the presidency. And I went because I represent 350,000 people in San Juan. If it would have been him and me, I would have not wasted my time. But in a democracy, you have to respect the leadership, even though you don't see eye to eye with a person. So he finally, you can see in the picture, he had to very lean over because he was so far away from me, so he had to reach out. And I said, it's about saving lives, Mr. President. It's not about politics. And he looked over me and said, well, thank you, everybody. And I kind of chuckled because if that didn't bother him, he would have said, I agree with you, right? But because it bothered him, then he didn't say anything. So all he did was, it was a feast of accolades to himself. Oh, we've done such a good job with the Coast Guard, and we've done such a good, and you know, in the meantime, I have a mayor sitting next to me saying, well, let him come to my town. And really the reality is not, have things gotten better in San Juan? Yes, in the past week and a half, FEMA has responded more equitably, and a lot of it has to do with local politics. You know. And I have to say, after my second meeting with Secretary Duke, and he left John Barca here to be our connection with FEMA. He's from Homeland Security. Things got better. Are they where they're supposed to be? No. Can I see the light at the end of the tunnel? A week ago I could imagine it, now I can see, but that is not the situation for most of the other 77 municipalities in Puerto Rico. And I'm not going to be such a bad Puerto Rican that I'm going to say, oh, things, as long as they're good for me, then they're good for the world. Because then I would become Donald Trump, and heaven forbid I should ever be like that man.
You clearly came into office with the support of many unions.
Yes.
In fact, when we flew in from the airport today and you were holding a news conference with Bernie Sanders, there were representatives of a number of unions. And among them were the electrical workers. Mm-hmm. And they talked about the power company. There's been discussions about whether you could transform this largest public power company in the country that has had the biggest shortage and blackout of electricity that we've ever seen in this mm-hmm. country, as a possibly test case where you start to use solar power.
Yes.
Well, what about this? What do you see happening? Do you see this as an attempt to privatize, or do you see creative ways that Puerto Rico could move forward and be a pioneer in solar
Well,
energy?
there are creative ways. Tesla has already come to Puerto Rico and done a humanitarian work at the Children's Hospital, where they have energized it with solar panels. I mean, this is a Caribbean island. You know, we get lots and lots of sun, so we should be able to reach goals that are increasing every year to move away from our addiction of fossil fuel to non-fossil fuel. And we should also be able to energize communities just using solar power, and perhaps some wind power if it's appropriate. But for the first time, at least, I heard today the president of the power company saying that they are of the union saying that they are looking forward to transforming the system and moving towards a better mix of regular our grid and solar power energy, and that was very refreshing to hear. So for those of them that say no, the unions just want to keep us one step behind, it's not true. That's just, again, you change the dialogue, you attack, so as to not to be able to defend. It's a lot easier to attack somebody than to defend what you believe in.
So talk about Senator Sanders coming here, who ran for president. Some say if he were the candidate against candidate Donald Trump, he might have won. But he was here in Puerto Rico. Mm-hmm. What did he do here? And what do you think he can do as a senator?
Well, he came here to listen, which is very important. And he came here to see firsthand. He didn't come here to throw paper towels at people. He came here and he walked around one of the most devastated areas of San Juan. He talked to the community board there.
Where did he go?
Playita. It's on the way to the airport or on your way from the airport. And it's a very, very disenfranchised community. The community board, the municipalities just work to organize them, and they are starting to come into power. And we say that because we really and truly believe that the communities should hold the power of their own destiny. That doesn't make it easier for us, but it makes it right. And that's what it's all about. So when we talk about Puerto Ricans needing power, it's not only electrical power that we need, but it's the true power that makes your voice be heard. And one of the things that I think Senator Sanders is going to do, which he has done before for Puerto Rico, is that he can be the echo of 1,000 voices that are clamoring for the appropriate help to listen to this. We get $4.9 billion, and although we're very grateful, it's a loan. So what is the way of treating a country that is $72 billion in debt, increase their debt by $4.9 billion? That doesn't make any sense. There should be a comprehensive package that includes education, medical, the medical system, our energy grid, and the transformation of that grid, economic development, small business development, and reconstruction of homes. And those are the things that we talk to Senator Sanders, and also not allowing this chaos to be a way of devaluing our university educational system by taking resources out, closing 50 municipalities, which will have to close if the $350 million that the Fiscal Control Board took away. Look, you have $4,900 million. Well, heck, give back the $350 million that you took away from the Fiscal Control Board. So those are very, very precise things that he could talk about. One of the things that the president of the local teachers union said is, look, they're telling us they're going to close schools because the Army Corps of Engineers has not inspected them. Well, first of all, get more people to inspect them. And secondly, the Army Corps of Engineers didn't inspect them to begin with. So if they have minor damages, let's get moving in the business of teaching our children how to become better human beings.
Speaking of education, whether it's Hurricane Harvey or Hurricane Irma, while the media covers it extensively, almost 24 hours a day, Puerto Rico dealing with Maria, I would say less, but still there has been significant coverage. Flashing the words extreme weather, severe weather, almost never, and I'm not talking Fox, I'm talking MSNBC and CNN, do they talk about global warming, climate change, climate chaos?
That's because some people think it's a hoax.
Well, we have a very proud climate change denying president.
But it's not a hoax.
But this is the media, and considered the more liberal media.
And we are seeing the effects of this. Tomorrow, we are expected to have heavy rains in San Juan and in the rest of Puerto Rico. So you had Irma, you had Maria. But Maria didn't stop until, just like Harvey. The rain didn't stop until a few days later. Maria's rain didn't stop until a few days later. So you have global warming. It is happening. It is real, and here it is. There's no denying it, and we have to deal with the consequences of our actions and take actions to revert that and make sure that we don't screw it up for the next generations more than we've already done.
That was San Juan Mayor Carmen Yulín Cruz. I interviewed her last month in San Juan's Roberto Clemente Coliseum, where she and almost her entire staff were living after Hurricane Maria devastated Puerto Rico. When we come back from the aftermath of one hurricane to another, we'll go to Texas to speak with Dr. Robert Bullard. He's known as the father of the environmental justice movement. What is environmental racism? Stay with us.